Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar tonight. My name is Adva Oren, and I'm Tau Global Leadership Community Manager, a community of young leaders and supporters of Tel Aviv University from around the world. Thank you, YPO, for the continued partnership and for joining us tonight. Now, I would like to invite Ben Perry from YPO Mosaic. Ben, please.
Thank you, Adva. Thank you for this partnership. I want to dive right in, and I want to first of all say thank you for this privilege to welcome Dr. Raz Zimmt, who is one of Israel's foremost experts on Iran. Dr. Zimmt is a senior research fellow and director of the Iran and Shia Axis Research Program for the Institute of National Security Studies, the INSS. He also serves as an Iran specialist in the Israeli Defense Intelligence Doctorate. He holds a PhD from Tel Aviv University, widely recognized for his analysis and contribution on this very important, relevant topic that we're all dealing with constantly. Dr. Zimmt is an expert on domestic affairs, the internal perspective, foreign policy, and Iran's role in the region, that we are all trying to understand how that changed and what reality we are now faced with. Few experts combine such first-hand insight into both the Iranian regime and society, and we're honored to have you. Dr. Zimmt, thank you so much. We're going to start with about half an hour from your perspective into everything that is happening. And then on the chat, please feel free to write all your questions, and I'll try to combine them together in an effective way and present them to Dr. Zimmt for the second part of this wonderful webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Adva, for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I think that at this period of time, when it comes to Iran, and although I spent more than 3 decades working on Iran, both in the military establishment and then in the academic world, I have to admit that I have currently more questions than answers. But I will try to share with you some of my thoughts concerning the impact of the war on different issues. Let me start by saying that although this war continued for less than 2 weeks, we cannot underestimate its importance and its significance. Just to give you a clue, from the Iranian point of view and the Iranian coverage of this war, they are already using the term Jang Tahmili. For those of you who don't speak Persian yet, I would say that Jang Tahmili means the imposed war. Now, the imposed war, for those of you who are not familiar with this term, was first used during the 1980s and afterwards, of course, to describe the Iran-Iraq war between 1980 and 1988. This was the first imposed war, and now they're speaking about the second one. So I certainly think that just like the Iran-Iraq war, which played a major role in designing and influencing Iran's strategy and consciousness and national identity, this war, although much shorter, fortunately, will have major implications on different aspects concerning Iran and the region. And I would like to point out or to share my views concerning 3 main issues. The first one is the Iran's strategy, or if you'd like, Iran's security concept, and how this is going to be affected by the war. The second issue will be Iran's readiness to go back to negotiations and perhaps a possible new nuclear agreement between Iran and the United States. And then last but not least, I would like to say a few words about the issue of the stability of the regime and the way this war has impacted or will impact the stability of the regime and the internal dynamics inside Iran. But I will start with the nuclear issue and the impact of the war on Iran's security concept. Look, for many years, the Iranian deterrence towards its so-called enemies, especially Israel, the little Satan, and the United States, the big Satan, was based on three main elements or components. The first one was this network of so-called proxies or allies or partners Iran managed to support in the region for many years, mostly Hezbollah, but also, of course, Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen. This was the first way of Iran to deter its enemies, and if this deterrence would fail, at least to retaliate to Israeli activity against Iran or Israeli attack against Iran through its proxies. I have to tell you that for many years during which I served in the military, I participated in dozens of simulations and war games and discussions concerning the possibility of an Israeli strike against nuclear facilities in Iran. And perhaps the number one concern, the number one priority was always what Hezbollah is going to do in a scenario in which the Zionists are going to attack the nuclear facilities inside Iran. That was the major concern, because with all due respect to Iran's missiles capability, especially 10 years ago or 20 years ago, the most obvious concern was what Hezbollah is going to do. And the fact that Israel didn't have to take into consideration the retaliation by Hezbollah since its defeat in the summer of 2024 served as an evidence for Iran's lacking any real ability to use its proxies, mostly Hezbollah, to retaliate to any kind of an Israeli strike. So it was clear even before the war that Iran has lost a very important and significant component of its deterrence vis-a-vis Israel due to the defeat of Hezbollah, the weakening of Hamas, and certainly perhaps the most important development was the collapse of the Assad regime back in December 2024, which meant that Iran did not lose just one of its strategic allies in the region, and even this ground corridor, which enabled Iran to support Hezbollah through Syria, but it has actually lost a very important component of what the Iranians have referred to as Iran's strategic death. So the proxies are no longer, in my view, a major component of Iran's deterrence vis-a-vis Israel. They knew that before the war, and they certainly know that today. It's very clear that during the 2 weeks of war, or almost 2 weeks of war between Israel, the United States, and Iran, regardless of the fact whether Iran was putting pressures on Hamas, on Hezbollah, on the Houthis, on the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq to retaliate, they failed to do that. Hezbollah, which is not capable to retaliate or doesn't want to retaliate to Israeli activity inside Lebanon, certainly didn't want to be engaged in any kind of escalation with Israel for the sake of the Iranians. So that's one part of the impact the war would have on Iran's security concept. And I think there are going to be more and more voices today in Iran, even compared to those we heard before the war, saying we tried to establish this network of proxies in the region in order to support Iran in case the Israelis act against us. And at the end of the day, they didn't do anything to help us. And instead of the proxies fighting for the sake of the Iranians were dragged into a direct conflict with Israel, not just during the war in Gaza, but certainly in this recent campaign. The second component of Iran's deterrence was, of course, its strategic capabilities, mostly its ballistic missiles and drones. Here, again, I have to say that even before the war with Israel, there were more and more voices inside Iran raising doubts concerning Iran's ability to force or to deter Israel through the missiles. If you look back at the two Iranian attacks on Israel back in April 2024 and then in October 2024, it was very clear that despite the capabilities owned by the Iranians concerning the thousands of missiles and drones. They couldn't use them in order to force a kind of a new equation of deterrence against Israel. Some of you might remember that after the first Iranian attack on Israel in April, General Salami, the commander of the Revolutionary Guard, who was, by the way, killed by Israel in the first few hours of the war, stated very confidently that Iran managed through this attack against Israel to force Israel into accepting a new kind of equation, which said if Israel attacks or kills Iranian general, whether it's inside Iran or in Syria, if Israel attacks any kind of Iranian interests or assets in Iran or outside Iran, Iran will retaliate through direct retaliation from Iran using its ballistic missiles and drones. Well, it didn't deter Israel. Israel continued to act against Iran and its proxies. And I think that was the reason why over the last few months, anyway, I was saying that during the last few months, we could hear more and more voices inside Iran saying we have to get the ultimate deterrence vis-a-vis Israel, and that we have to do through breaking out to nuclear weapons. This, by the way, explains those suspicious activities detected by the Israeli intelligence in recent months, which certainly triggered Israeli decision to initiate this war. And we can certainly say today that Israel detected several activities carried out by the nuclear scientists in Iran, which connected not just to the nuclear program of Iran, but with the weaponization part of the nuclear weapon. And that was certainly probably a result of the growing voices inside Iran questioning Iran's ability to deter Israel through its proxies and its missiles. So what I would say right now concerning the impact of the war, I will say that when it comes to the capabilities, to the nuclear capabilities of Iran, I think there is no doubt, regardless of the differences and contradictions between the different statements and intelligence assessments published in recent days, there is no doubt that Israel and the United States managed to degrade very significantly Iran's nuclear facilities. The attack against Natanz, and Fordo, the two main enrichment sites inside Iran, the first through US and Israeli attacks, the second one through the American attack, the strike against the site in Isfahan, another site very important within the enrichment program of Iran, and the assassination of around 14 nuclear scientists, which were directly involved in the weaponization part of Iran's nuclear program. Those all managed to degrade Iran's nuclear capabilities. Certainly, I think nobody can claim today that Israel and the United States managed to destroy 100% of Iran's nuclear program. That was not the objective. Nobody believed that it was possible. But if Iran, until 2 weeks ago, was considered to be a threshold state, less than 2 weeks away from breakout capability, and probably several months away from designing the first nuclear warhead, it is now much more incapable of using what remains of its nuclear assets in order to break out. Having said that, we have to take into consideration 2 or 3 main elements which are certainly going to be a major concern for Israel and the United States in the next few months. One is that while until the war, Iran was very close to breaking out, but there was no directive from the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, to break out. He certainly wanted to preserve Iran as a threshold state, but he didn't give, according to Israeli and American intelligence, any order to break out to weapon. Today, the situation might be that not only that Iran has not given up its nuclear aspirations, but that it is perhaps even more likely to assume that his motivation to break out is much bigger than it used to be until the war. And so the question is whether this motivation will be translated into an Iranian attempt to break out to weapon. And this, of course, will have to be discussed in Tehran, and the decision would be made upon three main issues. One, of course, is the remaining nuclear materials still exist in Iran. What happened to the approximately 400 kilograms of enriched uranium to 60%? Where are all those fissile material and centrifuges? The second one is the fact that the Iranian leadership should take into consideration the fact that a decision to break out would be very risky, especially having seen the Israeli intelligence penetration to Iran's nuclear program. And the third element would be that this decision would also be very risky due to the fact that the United States has already made it very clear that it is ready and determined to use force in order to delay or to destroy, if required, Iran's nuclear program. So the bottom line, I think, is that we should certainly take into consideration the fact that despite the fact that Iran's nuclear program is today in a much less advanced position that it used to be until 2 weeks ago, Iran's leadership aspiration and motivation might have been increased, and that could certainly lead to a decision by the Iranian leadership to use whatever is remained of its nuclear assets in order to break out. So this is one major implication of the war on Iran's nuclear and security strategy, and I will be happy to answer any questions about that in the Q&A. The second issue would be the Iranian readiness, or the Iranian leadership readiness to return to negotiations and sign perhaps a new nuclear deal with the United States. Let me just say here that even before the war erupted, during the talks held between Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Arakchi in Rome and in Muscat, Iran was already expressed its willingness to accept major concessions when it comes to Iran's nuclear program, including its enrichment capabilities. Iran was ready to accept enrichment to not more than 3.67%. Iran was ready to dismantle most of its advanced centrifuges. Iran was ready to give up its stocks of fissile material. One thing which Iran considered as a red line was the US demand that Iran will not be allowed to enrich uranium inside Iran. And so right now we're facing with two major questions. The first question is whether Iran is going to be ready to go back to negotiations after the already mistrust from among the Iranian leadership, and especially from Supreme Leader Khamenei towards the US, and especially towards Mr. Trump, is even bigger today than it used to be, because Khamenei, during his last message released only a few days ago, said very clearly the war provided us with another example that the United States is not interested in the issue in Iran's nuclear program. It is just using the nuclear program as an excuse to put more pressure on Iran in order to pave the way for a regime change in Iran. That was, by the way, his conviction even before the JCPOA was signed in 2015. He was certainly not willing to be engaged in any kind of negotiations, especially with President Trump. But at the end of the day, he was convinced that he should agree and authorize negotiation with the United States in order to allow sanctions relief. But this war and the support and the direct involvement by the United States certainly weakens the possibility that Iran is going to be willing to go back to negotiation table. Having said that, I can certainly imagine two scenarios in which Iran will be ready to go back to negotiations. One is if Khamenei is again being convinced by other elements within the Iranian government mainly his president Pezeshkian, who really needs or who really thinks that Iran needs a sanctions relief in order to improve the economic situation in Iran. In that case, Khamenei might be willing to reconsider going back to negotiation table. The second scenario, which in my view is very concerning, would be if Khamenei would like to use the negotiations and even a possible agreement with the United States in order to divert the attention towards negotiations, while he or his scientists are going to work on secret and covert activities meant to enrich uranium to 90% and perhaps breaking out. So he might be willing to do what the North Koreans did, negotiating with the United States, and at the same time looking for ways to enrich uranium and break out in a secret site somewhere in Iran. In addition, I have to say that my sense right now is that Khamenei and the Iranian leadership is certainly not in the mood of capitulation. If someone really expects Khamenei to come up and say, I'm ready to accept all the US demands, I think he's wrong. I think Khamenei, even after the war, is still very much determined to continue and resist any kind of giving up the idea of enrichment inside Iran. Iran has always considered this right not just as a national right, but also as a very important component of what Iran has considered to be as insurance for the stability of the regime. Meaning Iran has always thought that if it gives up the idea of enrichment inside Iran, it might become dependent on others in order to deliver nuclear fuel to Iran in case Iran needs this fuel in order to enrich it to a high-level percentage, military rate enriched uranium, and to break out. So I think it's going to be very, very difficult to convince the Iranians to give up this idea. And then it goes back to the US to decide what is the best way to reach an agreement with Iran in a way which would perhaps bridge this gap between the US demand of no enrichment and Iranian idea or demand to continue its enrichment of uranium inside Iran. Last remark concerning that, I think that all those ideas that the United States will be ready to invest billions of dollars inside Iran for the sake of Iran's giving up its right to enrich uranium inside Iran, I have to say I'm not sure that the Iranians will accept that. With all due respect to U.S. investments and U.S. money going inside Iran, this is something which, in my view, reflects the difference between the I would say business-oriented approach of President Trump and Mr. Witkoff, and the more ideologically oriented approach of Supreme Leader Khamenei. I don't think that regardless of how much money the US is ready to invest in Iran, this would convince Iran to give up what it considers to be a vital national interest. Last but not least, I would like to say a few words about the issue of regime change or stability of the regime. Look, before the war, there were two main theses among the Iran watchers, not just in Israel, but also globally, concerning the possible impact of Israeli or an American strike on Iran's nuclear facilities on the stability of the regime. The first thesis was that due to the very significant crisis of legitimacy suffered by the Iranian regime and the Islamic Republic, the Iranian people will just look for any opportunity, including Israeli or US strike on Iran, in order to pave the way for regime change. And in case of an Israeli attack, the Iranians will go to the streets and relaunch the protest movement and demonstrations and uprising against the Iranian regime. On the other hand, the other thesis, by the way, I supported this and I wrote in length about this possibility. This thesis claimed that due to the national solidarity inside Iran, in case of a very extended Israeli attack on Iran, this will actually result in what we can call rally around the flag. Rally around the flag, not in the sense that the ordinary Iranians, most of them certainly do not support the Islamic Republic and the Iranian regime. It doesn't mean that they will suddenly change their mind and support Khamenei or support the Iranian regime, but they will put much of their efforts in criticizing the external enemy rather than launching an uprising against the Islamic Republic. Unfortunately, I have to say, from all the reports coming out of Iran in the last 2 weeks, it seems that we certainly see this rally around the flag. And again, not from everyone. There are 90 million Iranians, so we could certainly see other voices as well. But it seems that the regime has succeeded in uniting the Iranian people around symbols like sovereignty, nationalism, and solidarity. And many Iranians consider Israeli attack not as an attack on the Islamic Republic of Iran, but as an attack on Iran. And I can hear and get many messages from Iran, including from among the dissidents and the opponents of the Iranian regime, saying, yes, we certainly don't support the Iranian regime, and we would like to wake up tomorrow morning to another kind of regime. But when we see Israel attacks with missiles and its airplanes, Iranian targets inside Iran, this is not the time to express our opposition towards the Iranian regime. This is the opportunity to rally around the flag, and many of them, I have to say, have become even very much anti-Israeli compared to the past, because they raised the issue that what Israel wants to achieve or wanted to achieve during the war was not just to destroy Iran's nuclear program and even not to topple the Iranian regime, but to disintegrate Iran and to cause damage to the territorial integrity of Iran. And that's something which certainly enables to unite most Iranians. And this is a very concerning issue, because when you see on the one side the Iranians who certainly don't go to the streets those days against the regime, in addition to what seems to be growing internal cohesiveness within the Iranian elite and growing repression by the Iranian elites, and there have been already reports on assassinations and executions and arrests and growing repression against civil society inside Iran. This could certainly give you an idea that it's going to be very difficult in the next few weeks and months for the ordinary Iranians to go back to the streets as they did, for example, in 2022, 2023, during the Mahsa Amini's protest. Having said that, and I will end with that, I think it's still too early to say whether this rally around the flag would continue. Because on the one side, one can say, yes, it's going to be much more difficult for the Iranians to launch some kind of an anti-regime movement in the foreseeable future, certainly due to the growing repression. On the other hand, there might be some point when we could see this public anger, which is right now still directed mostly towards Israel. It might be redirected towards the regime. And I assume that over time, there are going to be more and more questions raised by the Iranians saying, for example, why the Iranian regime has invested so much money in proxies and missiles and nuclear facilities, and all those were destroyed within a few months or a few weeks. There will be certainly questions: how come the Iranian regime again exposed its inability to provide defense and security, not just to the ordinary Iranians, but also to its nuclear scientists and to its high-ranking generals who were killed by Israel in the first few hours of the attack. All those questions and criticism against the failures of the Iranian regime might come up in the next few months inside Iran. This perhaps might accelerate those trends we have seen over the last few years of growing gap between the Islamic Republic and the Iranians. But I have to admit that right now I can see no real opposition inside Iran. There is no institutionalized, organized, led opposition inside Iran. And therefore, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for anyone in Iran to pave the way towards a regime change. But again, as I always say, it's almost impossible to identify the trigger for those kinds of regime change. We haven't managed to do that before the Arab Spring. We failed to do that before the collapse of the Assad regime, and we will probably fail to do that in Iran when the revolution comes. But right now, again, I don't see any real sign for this. So to conclude, I think that the war will have major impact on a variety of things. Some of them I discussed today, others I didn't discuss. For example, just one example, what will be the impact of the war on the way the Arab world is considering Iran following the war? What will be the lessons learned in Tehran from the lack of any military support given by Russia to Iran? This is certainly something which the Iranians will have to take into consideration, whether it could encourage Iranian attempts to get some kind of assistance from other players, China, North Korea, perhaps Pakistan. So there are many issues which might be influenced by the war. And so despite the fact that it was relatively short, I think that the impact of the war on Iran's policy, strategy, internal dynamics is something which will have to follow in the next few months at least. I will stop here and address any questions you have. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Zimmt. And obviously fascinating because I have over 21 questions already. So I'm going to do my best to try and group them together the best I can. So actually, let's start with your last part was about the internal situation in Iran right now. And maybe two questions about that. One, we know that Khamenei is 86 years old. There was a lot of questions about whether he should have been taken out or not. Can you say more about, and I'll divide it to two. One, what could have been and what might be the effect of killing Khamenei? How would it might affect, and what do you think the decisions for that could have been, and how would they affect the future? And also more about what's inside Iranian society, as we know, is not coherent. And in past years, we always said that Israel actually loves Iran. Maybe a practical question: what should Israel and the West do to try and not, as you said, force the Iranians to rally around the leader, but actually to try and have more strategic activity to try and topple the regime from within?
So concerning Khamenei, I did not think during the war, and I don't think today, that by killing Khamenei we will sort out all the problems concerning Iran. Iran is not Hamas. Iran is not even Hezbollah. Iran is a state of 90 million people with a very institutionalized government. If Khamenei would have been killed, then in a matter of a few hours or few days, the Assembly of Experts, this assembly of 88 clerics, would convene and would probably appoint a new leader, who, by the way, would be probably not as, perhaps even more hardliner than Khamenei. I don't know all the 88 members of the Assembly of Experts, but I know most of them, and I can tell you that all the clerics within the Assembly of Experts, one of them will be the successor of Khamenei, are all either conservatives, very conservatives, or very radicals. And so I think that to assume that following the killing of Khamenei, we will face a dramatic impact on Iran's ability to Iranian leadership's ability to govern. I think the answer for that is no. We might, by the way, got a weaker supreme leader, but he could probably be more influenced by the Revolutionary Guards. And the Revolutionary Guard, I think, in an event of killing Khamenei, would have become the #1 institution inside Iran. Right now, there are very close relations between the Revolutionary Guards and Supreme Leader Khamenei. I assume that in the day after Khamenei, whether he's killed or leaves the world peacefully, the Revolutionary Guards will play an even more significant role in leading and managing the internal affairs and foreign policy of Iran. And the Revolutionary Guards, as we know, especially the higher echelons of the Revolutionary Guards, are as hardliner, as nationalistic, as anti-American, as anti-Israeli, just as Supreme Leader Khamenei. So I would not bet on a real change in Iran. By the way, the killing of Khamenei might have encouraged at least some of the Iranian proxies, mostly Hezbollah and the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, to join the war against Israel, because they also consider Supreme Leader Khamenei as their source of emulation, the religious source of emulation. So that's concerning Khamenei. 86 is probably not going to live much longer, and certainly this war is another stage in Iran's path towards succession following his death. Concerning Israel and regime change in Iran, look, I've always thought, and I think that the war even strengthened my convictions, that a regime change in Iran, which, by the way, I think is the only real solution to the Iranian problem. I think that regardless of how much success we achieved in dealing with Iran's nuclear and missiles capabilities, this combination between the Islamic Republic with its ideology supporting the annihilation of Israel and its capabilities still remain, whether it's nuclear or missiles or drones or its regional assets. This is a combination which is dangerous, not just for Israel, but for the entire world. And I think it's better that sooner than later we will see a regime change in Iran. Having said that, I still believe that this regime change in Iran is 90% dependent on the Iranian people. And I think that only when millions of Iranians are going to go to the streets, when we see some kind of coalition between different sections of Iranian society working together for the sake of regime change, and this is very important, only when we see that the Iranian regime might lose some of its determination or ability to repress a possible protest movement in Iran, only then we could see a real regime change. The West, the international community, could certainly support some of the processes. For example, it can give support for the Iranian people to circumvent internet or social media filtering. It could help, for example, there was an idea after the Masa Amini's protest in 22-23 in order to mobilize the workers in Iran who were very hesitant whether to join protests and demonstration and strikes because of their economic dire situation. There was, for example, one idea that the international community, perhaps the United States, would form some kind of a foundation which will be able to support the workers financially in case of strikes, longer strikes inside Iran. There are ways to support Iranian civil society. There are ways to work with different sections of Iranian society. There are certainly ways to make sure that if there are millions of Iranians in the streets, certain things could happen which could accelerate this process. For example, if in the day when we see millions of Iranians in the streets, the Basijis, the member of the Basij militia of the Revolutionary Guards will not be able to pull out money from the ATMs, this could certainly help the demonstrators. But at the end of the day, I think that the only solution and the only way to topple the Iranian regime is from within and with the initiative of the Iranian population themselves.
Thank you. I have a very interesting question about the opposition, the Iranian opposition outside of Iran. The Shah that we hear a lot about, strong connection with the US, with Israel, Israeli Americans. Can you say more about whether this is really effective in any sort of way? What is the internal Iranian perspective towards that? And is this a direction that we should be thinking about? As you said, that there is no internal opposition, and probably the biggest focus of the regime is to make sure that there is not, but should an external opposition like that is effective?
So on the one hand, I have great respect for any kind of Iranian opposition outside Iran, in the diaspora, in the exile, including some of the monarchists and Reza Pahlavi himself. He certainly comes up with good intentions. But I think that many in Israel and the United States don't make a distinction between the nostalgic feelings inside Iran, which certainly exist, to the pre-revolutionary regime and to the monarchic era. Many of them, certainly because of their opposition to the Iranian regime, would like to go back to a more a glorious past of more not liberal, because he was certainly not liberal, but more pro-Western and secular kind of regime. But I think, and there were some voices and slogans raised in protest movements in Iran over the last few years, where you could see, for example, pictures of the father of the late Shah, Reza Shah, the founder of the Pahlavi dynasty in Iran in the 1920s, being raised by protesters and demonstrators. But I have to admit that I personally don't think that most Iranians would consider Reza Pahlavi as a true credible leader of a future revolution inside Iran. Most of them would certainly think that if there is a regime change, it has to be relied on the Iranian people inside Iran. And I have to say again, it's very early to say, but I get the sense that the Reza Pahlavi support for the Israeli and American attack, in a way, was considered by many Iranians. I certainly would not say most of the Iranians, and perhaps not the majority of the Iranians, but as a way of, I would say, treason, because they just don't like those who support external enemies who attack their own state. So I think that it's going to be very difficult for the outside opposition, including the monarchists, to rally the majority of the Iranian people.
Fantastic. Thank you. Fascinating. I want to move from the internal society to the external. And then I think, again, my questions maybe have two angles on that. One is a little more about how you think the future effect on the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, all of the proxies. How is this going to affect them from the financial, practical to the ideological and I don't know, the fantastic wishes they had, seeing the level of defeat, how would that affect them? So that's one side of the external. And then the other one, which you mentioned a little bit, was should we pay attention to new alliances being forged? As you mentioned, China, Russia, North Korea, what should we expect on that front?
So concerning the so-called axis of resistance, in my view, the axis, I would say, collapsed, but certainly was weakened since the beginning of the war in Gaza, and especially since the summer of 2024, following the defeat of Hezbollah and then the collapse of the Assad regime. I think that by now it's very clear that Iran, even if it doesn't make a decision, and it won't make a decision to desert and give up this idea of trying to really reestablish or reconstitute its regional position through its allies in the region. By the way, Iran tried to gain influence even among non-state players even before the revolution. Now, I don't know if most of you know, but the Shah had very good connections with the Shiite communities both in Lebanon, including the leader of the Shia community in Lebanon, Musa Sadr, back in the 1960s and 1970s, and the Iranian representatives in Iraq were engaged in connections with the Shia majority, but then political minority under Saddam Hussein during the 1970s, and it certainly continues today. So Iran is not going to give up the idea of resistance and its support for its allies. But right now, its ability to do that is very much constrained, and not just because of economic and budget issues. This money was never the problem, by the way. Even during the maximum pressure strategy of Mr. Trump during his first term, despite the very dire economic situation inside Iran, they continued to give money to the Hamas and to Hezbollah. By the way, in the 2 years before the October 7th attack, Iran actually increased its support for Hamas in order to work on this plan, despite all the economic problems. It's a matter of priorities. But right now, the problem is that it's very difficult for Iran to support Hamas in Gaza for obvious reason. It tried in a way to compensate, at least in a way, for the loss of Hamas in Gaza by delivering more weapons to the West Bank. Not very successfully, I have to say. The pro-Iranian militias in Iraq are mostly concentrated right now in the external and domestic pressures on the militias to disarm themselves. They're getting ready to the next parliamentary elections during November, I think. And Hezbollah is very much weakened and under major pressures, not just by Israel, who keeps eliminating Hezbollah activists almost on a daily basis, but also from the Lebanese government, who is putting so much pressure on Hezbollah to disarm itself. So the ability of Iran to support its proxies is very much weakened by now. The Houthis, with all due respect, I have to say that they're certainly trying to continue their efforts against Israel, but this has never been a major component of the Iranian pro-Iranian axis in the region, and I don't have any doubts that Iran will find it more and more difficult to do that. Even if, by the way, even if tomorrow morning there is a new nuclear deal between Iran and the United States, and billions of dollars are going to go to Iran, they will certainly would like to use some of that money to increase their support for its allies in the region. But again, I don't think that the money is the number one problem. Concerning the alliances, Iran is not going to give up Russia because it doesn't have any real alternative. It's not that it's going to all the ideas after the JCPOA was signed in 2015, raised by former President Rouhani in Iran, that Iran should balance its connections with the Russians and the Chinese through better relations with the Europeans. All those ideas collapsed after Trump withdrew from the JCPOA in May 2018. And I think that the current Iranian leadership certainly doesn't think that Iran should look west after years of looking towards the east, not exactly east, north to Russia, east to China, south to the global south. But there are certainly very much disappointment, I think, in Iran, not just since the war erupted. We all remember that Iran tried to reach out to Russia in order to repair and to rehabilitate the aerial defense system, which were targeted by Israel in late October. And the Russians were just not ready to do that because they needed those systems for the war against Ukraine. So this could certainly increase the traditional mistrust in Tehran towards Moscow. China is a very important partner of Iran, mostly in the economic issue. As you probably know, Iran still exports about 1.5 million barrels of oil per day. 90 and even 95% of that goes to China, and the Chinese are going to do that in the future as well. There were also reports, even before the war, that China delivered some components of missile production capabilities to Iran. So Iran can certainly reach out to China to increase the deliveries of missiles capabilities following the damage caused by Israel to its missile program. And we might see some attempts, I think, by Iran to reach out also to North Korea, perhaps even to Pakistan, in order to supply Iran with several components, either for its nuclear capabilities or missiles capabilities.
Thank you. I'm going to try and squeeze two big questions into one, as we're going to need to close soon. And I think these questions are, again, more on the external relations side. One is some of us here actually traveled to Azerbaijan. And I think both Israelis and Americans are not, I wasn't aware of how important the relations with Azerbaijan to Israel as an ally, as a Muslim country bordering with Iran, with the majority of Iranians being Azeri. Can you say more about the importance of this relationship? Vis-a-vis, it might be part of what we heard, a way to maybe even help topple the regime from within. So that's one specifically about Azerbaijan. And the second one that I'm trying to squeeze in is how do you think we hear a lot about the Abraham Accords, Saudi, Emirates, Syria. How would, again, also to maybe end with an optimistic view, how can Israel and the US perspective of new alliances already could help strategically in managing the situation?
So concerning the ties between Israel and Azerbaijan, there is certainly a strategic partnership between the two states. It was very clear during the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia over Nagorno-Karabakh. There were even reports during the war that Israel might have used Azerbaijan in a way to enable itself some of its operational capabilities inside Iran. The Iranians are certainly very much concerned with that. But it's important to say Azerbaijan is a very important neighbor of Iran. The two states have certainly tried, especially following the Azeri victory in the war against Armenia, to improve the relationship. There is a very big minority inside Iran. About 20% of Iranian population are Azeri. So the Iranians are also very sensitive concerning their relationship with the northern part of Azerbaijan, meaning the independent Azerbaijan. So I think that despite the strategic partnership between Israel and Azerbaijan, the Iranians don't consider that as a zero-sum game. It doesn't mean for Iran that they have to lower their relationship with Azerbaijan just for the sake of just because of the Israeli relations with Azerbaijan. But of course, if the Iranians will get evidence that Azerbaijan was used by Israel in order for the strike against Iran, we might see some more tensions between the two states. But again, I think that both countries, Azerbaijan and Iran, have good interest in preserving a relatively good neighborhood between the two states. Concerning the Abraham Accords, first of all, we have to take into consideration that the position of the Gulf states towards the war was very negative. It's not that the Arab states would like Iran to become, of course, a military nuclear state, but they were very much concerned with the possibility of escalation, which would be expanded to the Arab states as well. There was a major concern in both Saudi Arabia and the UAE from the possibility of a regional war and escalation, which could bring out or result in Iranian attempts to hit American bases in the Gulf and even oil installations and infrastructures in the Gulf states. This was very evident. This message was relayed to President Trump in his recent visit in the Gulf a few weeks ago. And so we can certainly see over the last few years a process of improving ties between Iran and the Gulf states. Of course, the peak was the agreement signed in March 2023 to resume relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I don't think that the war in Iran accelerated directly the prospects for normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia or other countries, including Syria, joining the Abraham Accords. This, I think, will mainly depend not on what's going on between Israel and Iran, but what's going on in the Palestinian arena, mostly the war in Gaza. If the war in Gaza, as we all hope, will come to an end, hopefully soon, of course, with the release of our hostages, this ceasefire could certainly make it more possible to renew talks over normalization, over joining other countries joining the peace accords with Israel. But I think that it's not going to be enough just to get ceasefire in Gaza. We will have to see at least some kind of readiness from the Israeli government to move forward in the Palestinian issue. I'm not sure that this is possible, but we are all waiting to see whether Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to visit the United States in the coming days, and perhaps we will see some positive results concerning the normalization with Saudi Arabia, of course, the war in Gaza being ended, and perhaps in the future, Syria. I don't think that a peace treaty between Syria and Israel is very realistic, but we could certainly seek for some kind of security arrangements between Syria and Israel on a non-warfare situation as a first step towards perhaps in the future the joining of Syria to the Abraham Accords.
Thank you so much. I think we're gonna have to close where we asked for an hour of your time. Thank you so much. This was fascinating. We live in very interesting historic times, and everything is changing very fast, very rapidly. Thank you so much for your time, the ability and the access for us to help us think about this in a strategic way is very helpful, and I hope we're gonna get to do this in the future as well. Thank you everybody for joining, and thank you Tel Aviv University for this partnership. And again, fascinating to watch and observe what is happening. And as you said, I want to close with a prayer that our hostages will be released today, not tomorrow, and that we have the ability, the bravery, the wisdom to leverage all the incredible military success that we have had in the last few weeks and months to a brave vision for a new, stronger reality for the state of Israel and for the region. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So,
So,